In the last episode, the Genpei War came to its epic conclusion, as the Taira would be defeated at the legendary battle of Dan no Ura, sealing the fate of Japan as the nation would come under the control of the Minamoto. Now, with true power resting in Kamakura, the seat of a mighty military government under Minamoto no Yoritomo, it will only be a matter of time before his authority becomes legitimate as the ruler of the first great shogunate, or Bakufu. This is the dawn of a new age, one in which warriors will come to at last dominate the country in ways not yet seen before. However, although he had won the war, we shall see if Yoritomo will prove successful at tying up loose ends, as well as ensuring his family maintains their own position atop this new regime. The war was over. With the Taira child emperor Antoku dead, and the family's leaders killed or soon to be executed, in the wake of Dan no Ura, the total Minamoto victory was complete. By 1185, a new power had arisen in Japan. Born throughout the warring years, Minamoto no Yoritomo's military government in Kamakura had become the supreme authority of the land. What influence was left in Kyoto after the war? One emperor dead, another hastily enthroned? A court in disarray with a retired monarch pulling the strings behind the scenes? No, power was no longer there. The truth that was established throughout the fires of the Hogen and Heiji rebellions decades prior still rung true. Real power in Japan rested in the hands of warriors. Specifically now, the Minamoto family and those loyal to Yoritomo's military government in Kamakura. Yet, although the Minamoto were the victors of the conflict, an odd question now presented itself. Who was the actual champion of the war? Who really won it? One might initially be quick to assume that all looked to Yoritomo as the obvious leader of the victorious Minamoto. However, as we know, Yoritomo had not ventured forth to personally lead great campaigns against the Taira. In truth, the real leader who had won the war was that of his brother, the valiant Minamoto no Yoshitsune, who through triumphs at Ichinotani, Yashima, and Dan no Ura had destroyed the Taira. The relationship between the siblings had already been falling apart. Yoritomo had attempted to keep Yoshitsune in check after his victory at Ichinotani, yet Yoshitsune had gone over his head, personally leading an attack against the Taira stronghold at Yashima and later leading Minamoto forces at Dan no Ura. These were necessary steps that needed to be taken, and if Yoshitsune had not stepped forth to commit to them, we don't know how much longer the war might have actually lasted. For Yoritomo, the conflict had turned into one more solely focused on control, enforcing his will across the land and ensuring that no rebellious leader, much like the prior Minamoto no Yoshinaka, emerged to challenge him and upset the established order. Who further stoked the flames of Yoritomo's distrust of Yoshitsune was that of Kajiwara Kagetoki. As we saw in the previous episode, Kagetoki had personally been sent by Yoritomo to oversee the new offensive against the Taira in an effort to take command away from Yoshitsune. Yet this plan backfired when Yoshitsune went forth on his own to attack the Taira and even accused Kagetoki of cowardice for not being more willing to engage their enemy. Kagetoki was thus sidelined by Yoshitsune and did not receive any of the recognition that he likely believed would have belonged to him in leading campaigns to end the war. Because of this, he was all too eager to report back to Yoritomo of Yoshitsune's insubordination, boastful nature, and potential rebellious intent. In the aftermath of the great triumph at Dan-no-ura, Yoshitsune and his forces would enter Kyoto as victorious heroes. Many, including Yoshitsune himself, would even be granted rewards of land by the court for their achievements. This prompted a paranoid outburst from Yoritomo, who chastised the warriors receiving such titles, especially since they were not first approved by him. Paul Varley further explains Yoritomo's response in his book Warriors of Japan as portrayed in the War Tales. On 4/29, 3 days after Yoshitsune entered Kyoto, a letter arrived from Yoritomo ordering those warriors who wished to give their loyalty to Kamakura to desist from serving Yoshitsune. Yoritomo accused Yoshitsune of having caused resentment among the warriors assigned to him for the campaign against the Taira by willfully demanding rigid subordination to him. In messages sent about the same time to Kagetoki and Noriyori, Yoritomo referred to Yoshitsune as a criminal, zainin, who had sought to alienate Eastern warriors from their responsibilities and loyalty to Kamakura. Yoshitsune was supposedly caught completely off guard by Yoritomo's response. Instead of being honored for his great victory, he was now being treated like a rebel. Yoshitsune immediately sent a letter back to Yoritomo, vowing his complete loyalty to him, and soon enough he departed for Kamakura. Yet when he arrived, he would be entirely barred from entry, prompting him to wait for several weeks, potentially at a location known as Koshigoe outside of Yoritomo's capital. During this time, Yoshitsune would write what has become known as the Koshigoe letter. However, the authenticity of the letter has been called into question in recent years. Still, the letter itself, if actually from Yoshitsune, explains his actions and mindset about what has transpired, yet continuing to reaffirm his loyalty to Yoritomo while tearing down any notion of treachery. Eventually, Yoritomo would order Yoshitsune to return to the capital. Yet while en route, Yoritomo would issue a decree dispossessing Yoshitsune of the new lands he had been granted as a reward from the court. Once back in Kyoto, Yoritomo would, in time, order an attack on Yoshitsune's residence in aims to kill him and end the threat he posed once and for all. However, the attack would be repelled, and Yoshitsune would quickly learn who it was who ordered it. At this point, there was no turning back. The bridge between the brothers had been burned. Eventually, Yoshitsune's sadness turned to anger. He had been forced into a situation where he was pitted against his own kin, but he would not go down without a fight. He would in time form an alliance with his uncle, Minamoto no Yukiie, who had at one point served under the rebellious Yoshinaka. Yukiie was also viewed as a threat by Yoritomo, so it was easy for him and Yoshitsune to see one another as natural allies. Together, they would petition the prominent retired emperor Go-Shirakawa to be granted an edict to destroy Yoritomo. In Kyoto, there was still much sympathy for Yoshitsune and his cause. In the capital, he was still seen as a hero, and the court was aware of the turn Yoritomo had made against his brother. Thus, Go-Shirakawa went forth with the issuing of the edict, also likely knowing it was in his best interest not to oppose warrior leaders at this time, especially ones in the capital. Turning his back on Yoritomo was certainly not ideal, but it was something he knew he would likely just have to deal with later. Soon, Yoshitsune and Yukiie departed for the west, wishing to head to Kyushu where they would amass an army with which to challenge Yoritomo. However, the pair were hunted down and attacked by war parties from Kamakura. Surviving an attack in Setsu, the two would attempt to set sail from the port of Daimotsu. It was then, though, that disaster struck, as a massive storm arose, destroying many boats and separating both Yoshitsune and Yukiie. It is not believed that the pair would ever be able to rejoin, and Yoshitsune briefly disappears from the pages of history for a time. As for Yukiie, he would attempt to hide in Izumi province but would eventually be discovered in 1186. He would be captured, taken back to Kamakura, and be executed along with his sons. Yoshitsune, on the other hand, would reappear in records all the way to the north in Mutsu province by 1187, being sheltered by Fujiwara no Hidehira, with whom Yoshitsune had spent much of his youth. Yoshitsune, along with his family and supporters, such as his storied friend the warrior monk Benkei, managed to live peacefully here for several years. Hidehira had remained loyal to Yoshitsune, and also likely saw him as a powerful ally should an attack come from Kamakura against the Oshu Fujiwara. Although, in that same year, Hidehira would pass away, leaving instructions for his sons to continue their commitment to protecting Yoshitsune. They were not unified, however, and butted heads on matters of running the clan. Yoshitsune was able to use his influence to manipulate them for a time, yet his luck would finally run out by 1189. It is thought that Yoritomo had become aware of Yoshitsune's location in the north, and being that the northern Oshu Fujiwara were not under the control of the Kamakura government, there was the threat of conflict between the two. It was here that Hidehira's heir, Fujiwara no Yasuhira, in fear of an impending attack by Yoritomo, decided to rid himself of Yoshitsune. He would attack Yoshitsune's residence with several hundred warriors. Overwhelmed, the warrior monk Benkei would make a heroic last stand to defend his lord, buying Yoshitsune the time he needed inside. Understanding his end was at hand, Yoshitsune would kill his family before killing himself. Yasuhira would send Yoshitsune's head to Kamakura as a gift for Yoritomo. However, this still did not stop Yoritomo from feeling the need to deal with the northern Fujiwara. Yoritomo, relentless as ever, would still send a massive army north to subjugate the Oshu Fujiwara. Yasuhira would attempt to flee, yet he would be betrayed and slain. With the destruction of the Oshu Fujiwara and the death of his brother Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the last major threats to Yoritomo's own influence were finally eliminated. With his direct influence now spreading far and wide across roughly half the country, Yoritomo had become perhaps the most powerful warrior leader Japan had ever seen, only rivaled by the late Taira no Kiyomori. With such authority, he would at long last journey to Kyoto in 1190. Yoritomo wished to acquire a firmer sense of legitimacy with which to rule over the land. Legitimacy only the court could grant him, and there was little the court could do to oppose him. Yoritomo sat at the head of the warrior class after having destroyed any and all opposition. However, the retired Emperor Go-Shirakawa was still someone who eyed Yoritomo with suspicion. As we have previously seen over the past decades, Go-Shirakawa has had continual rough experiences when dealing with samurai. Overpowered by Kiyomori and then later by Yoshinaka, he now sat face to face with yet another powerful warrior leader who saw fit to take from the emperor and the court what little they perhaps had left. Although Yoritomo was now the undisputed victor of the Genpei War and whose side had liberated Kyoto from the Taira usurpers, Go-Shirakawa stopped short of giving Yoritomo what he truly desired, the title of Sei Taishogun. It was not until 2 years later, after the death of Go-Shirakawa in the spring of 1192, that the court would at last be free to bestow Yoritomo with this most coveted rank. As we have previously discussed, there had been many different variations of the title of shogun. Yet many of these titles were ruled out, being that some had already been applied to Taira leaders, or that of Minamoto no Yoshinaka, and thus could have been perceived as bad omens. Sei Taishogun, though, was a title previously held by Sakanoui no Tamurumaro, who had won great victories against the Emishi centuries prior. Thus, this was the variation they went with, and would forever be the official title for shoguns going forward. As A History of Japan by R.H.P. Mason and J.G. Caiger further explains, the man who was already by birth the head of the house of Minamoto became Sei Taishogun, and this old title acquired a completely new meaning. Whoever had held it in the past had been empowered to wage war on the Ainu frontier, but Yoritomo was commissioned to govern a country that he had restored to peace. Whoever had held the title in the past had surrendered his sword of office once a particular frontier campaign was over. But Yoritomo, it would seem, intended to remain shogun for life. And what is more, it was widely understood that he would pass his rank on to his heirs. Thus, Yoritomo became the first shogun of our modern definition of the word, becoming the sole leader of the warrior class across the country, leading affairs from a new capital in the east, Kamakura, where his military government can now be referred to as a shogunate. Yet, instead of trying to take over the court as Taira no Kiyomori had attempted to do, Yoritomo had maintained a distance. His power base was far away in Kamakura, and he promised not to interfere with much of the inner workings and bureaucracy of the capital so long as he received logical administrative rights over land stewardship which warriors had been gaining control over now for some time. This was of course not framed in any way that could be perceived as a takeover, but more in a sense of duty and obligation. Yoritomo's military government was not meant to challenge the emperor and the court, but to protect it and serve it in a more efficient manner, where the warrior class was now reined in under the command of a singular leader, a shogun. As historian Kenneth Hanshall describes, the old central institutions were left largely intact, though weakened. Old titles were retained, though often given a new meaning. Kyoto still remained the official capital, and the court stayed on there. Recent research has suggested that the court retained a greater vitality than previously believed, especially with regard to bureaucratic matters, and that religious institutions also played a significant role in the political world. In that sense, rather than simple warrior rule such as characterized the succeeding Muromachi period, it was perhaps more a case of cooperative rule during the Kamakura period. Nevertheless, Yoritomo had his Bakufu. He was able to award land and titles to loyal warriors without interference from the court, and their warrior houses were able to then develop their own house laws and collect dues. It was a system which worked to further empower the samurai, yet over time, as a byproduct, also weakened what influence the Japanese aristocracy had once possessed. But while everything had seemed to come into shape for Yoritomo and his mighty new government, there was a danger lurking in the shadows he never foresaw. Yoritomo had married the daughter of Hojo Tokimasa, and the Hojo themselves had been one of Yoritomo's most significant early supporters. Yet, as we will soon see, they were merely the tiger in the bush, waiting to strike at the most opportune moment. Minamoto no Yoritomo would die suddenly in 1199. After stories say he was thrown from his horse. If this is true, it would be a most poetic end for a warrior leader who had won control of the country through roughly no fighting of his own, and who never suspected the impending demise of his own family hiding in plain sight. Upon Yoritomo's death, his teenage son, Minamoto no Yoriie, would succeed him, several years later officially becoming the new shogun. However, Yoriie would never be able to attain the same level of influence his father had possessed. His prominent mother, Hojo Masako, and grandfather, Hojo Tokimasa, saw fit to seize control over the Bakufu. They had amassed a considerable amount of influence, and now with Yoritomo gone, it was time for the Hojo to step in and assert their own dominance. It is believed that the Hojo would even go so far as to carry out a systematic purge of Yoritomo's loyalists, including figures previously mentioned such as Kajiwara Kagetoki. Yoriie would try to resist them, even setting up his own council. Yet, without significant backing, he would never be able to properly take the reins himself. Eventually, Tokimasa would move to rid himself of his own grandson, Yoriie, so that his younger brother Minamoto no Sanetomo could be installed as shogun. Being still a child, it was thought that Sanetomo would be far easier to manipulate. Yoriie would attempt to retaliate against Tokimasa, but it was too late. He would be banished and later killed by Hojo forces in 1204. This all but sealed the fate of the Kamakura government. By this point, the Hojo had created a powerful new position for themselves within the Bakufu, the position of regent or shiken. Thus, the Hojo regency came into being. As for Sanetomo, he would remain as a puppet shogun until his assassination in 1219 at the hands of one of Yoriie's sons. With this, the position of shogun would pass out of the direct Minamoto line of Yoritomo, as the next figure installed as shogun by the Hojo Regency would be that of Kujo Yoritsune of the Fujiwara family, yet he was still distantly related to that of Minamoto no Yoritomo. Just as the emperor had become somewhat of a powerless figurehead, now so too had the shogun. From this point on, it would be members of the Fujiwara and even imperial princes who would take up the position of shogun during the reign of the Kamakura Bakufu. This was done by the Hojo Regency as a measure to make the position itself appear more legitimate, despite the fact that true power would rest within the hands of the Hojo Shiken. Now, there is one additional detail we have not yet addressed in this video, one which has caused much speculation over the years. This being the truth of the Hojo family's lineage. As we have previously discussed, the Hojo were descended from the Taira. This has led some to consider the possibility that the Hojo family's shrewd yet violent takeover of the Bakufu was perhaps an ultimate form of revenge taken by the Taira against the Minamoto. This idea is of course very outlandish and far-fetched. It is much more likely that the Hojo were just ambitious and opportunists, wishing to maintain their prominent role. However, this still does not erase the fact that the Hojo were a branch of the Taira, and that their destruction of Minamoto rule can, in retrospect, greatly weaken the legacy of Yoritomo depending on your point of view. Despite that, Yoritomo was able to defeat the main Ise branch of the Taira in the Genpei War. He did not consider that one of the many sub-branches of the Taira who had pledged loyalty to him may one day usurp the power he had established. As we had seen, Yoritomo had become quite paranoid over the years, eliminating all those he saw as a potential threat, both real or otherwise. Yet, somehow, he failed to consider other branches of the Taira, despite their supposed oaths of loyalty. Although he went through many measures to secure his own supreme position atop the military government, he lacked the foresight to establish a more concrete foundation for the eventual rule of his children. Because of this, perhaps an argument could be made that Yoritomo's own failings to curb the rising influence of the Hojo indirectly led to a real Taira victory in the end. It is an interesting matter to ponder. In the next episode, we will move forward in time quite a bit to a great threat which would arise off the shores of Japan during the height of the Kamakura period. It is here we will witness the storied Mongol invasions of Japan. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most informative.